Hi, my name is Karen McCabe and welcome to another Right Source non-profit governance discussion. Today I would like to talk about the governance of risk in the non-profit boardroom. Risk is one of two main functions. Strategy, or setting the strategic direction, is a board function that gets quite a lot of attention, of course, because driving your non-profit towards its purpose is very, very important. But another important board function, which doesn't get quite the same amount of excitement, is of course risk. So today I'd like to talk about risk in the boardroom and the importance of having and working with a risk appetite statement. So what is a risk appetite statement? Well, ASIC have an excellent definition of that, and they say that an organisation's risk appetite is the amount of risk it's willing to accept in pursuing its strategic objectives. So that seems very clear, but what it does is actually sets the parameters for which the organisation can manage risk. So let's break that down a little bit more. A risk appetite statement is a communication tool. It creates a shared understanding, if you like, between the board and the management in the organisation about what is essentially acceptable behaviour in the organisation and in its decision making. So that's the second thing. It guides the organisational decision making at board and organisational level. It's also a tool that the board can use to monitor the organisation, how it deals with risk and its risk profile. Finally, it should be used to incite action. So it should encourage the organisation, or used as a basis for the organisation to be able to minimise and control risk. And it does that through the assistance of the risk register, of course, but they need to work hand in hand. A risk appetite statement essentially is, if you're going to put it all together, a decision tool that guides the amount and type of risk that is acceptable to the organisation in pursuit of its strategic objectives. It needs to be clear about the types of risks. So you really need a clear definition of what risk that you're talking about. You also need to be clear about the level of risk. So you need to link your definition with very clear consequences so that you can understand sort of what is acceptable. And then all of that needs to be aligned with your strategy. So alignment with your organisational purpose is really, really important. You want risks that matter. Finally, it should be measurable so that the board can tell, like, when is the company operating outside of its risk profile or its risk tolerance? And it needs to be able to tell whether a decision is a good idea or not. So what should organisations be doing with their risk appetite statement at board level? What does the board need to do? It needs to establish the risk context. That's extremely important, is to understand which risks are aligned to your strategic direction. Then it needs to determine the level of risk. So identify the consequences. Using a risk consequence matrix is an excellent idea, excellent tool for that. And also the board needs to approve the risk appetite statement at board level. So they need to have a good understanding of what it is, and they need to be getting involved in their risk appetite statement. And finally, they need to review their risk appetite statement annually. So they need to have a look at whether the risk appetites and tolerances that were set down last year, are they still appropriate and are they realistic for the year moving forward? For let's face it, you should only be accountable for what you can actually control. So figure out whether that risk appetite statement is a realistic thing for the organisation to work with. And just double check again whether it's aligned with the strategic goals. And finally, the last thing that the board needs to do is to absolutely walk the talk. So get involved in your annual review of your risk appetite statement. Make sure it's on your board's work plan and scheduled in the calendar each year. And then regularly review the risk register, which is another important topic on risk, which we might talk about another time, for new risks, and look at the risks that are outside of the appetite. So using it as your monitoring tool and as a way to control the risks in the way that they're being dealt with in your organisation. And finally, the last thing is just to be willing to hold your management accountable. Make sure that you put in place a management plan for any risks that are outside appetite. And that's been fun talking about risks. Thanks so much. My name's Karen, and we'll see you next time.